Cool. Uh, I think I can begin with a small intro about Bitshala because I see some new faces, and then the structure will be that Professor Per Bylund will take it over from there. He will talk a little about his journey, Austrian economics, and the book that we are going to take up in our reading club, followed by a small Q&A. And from there on, every Wednesday 8 p.m., we resume wherever the last discussion was done in the previous week. So that's the plan. That's the layout of today's session. So let's begin a new book this time around, and uh, broadly because some faces are new. I just want to tell those people that Bitshala is focused on education around Bitcoin. We run 4 study cohorts throughout the year, plus a lot of club activities. One of them is Wednesday's book reading, wherein we pick up a book based on public voting. Earlier, we used to do it inside our Discord. This time, we opened it up on Twitter, and that's how Professor saw our tweet. We have been doing it for a year. Uh, Previous books were more technical in nature, based on everyone's feedback. This time around, we have gone for a popular book on Austrian economics, and I'm looking forward to sort of doing many more books with you guys. Professor Bylan has been gracious to sort of come on this first intro session, and we have a decent enough audience, so maybe I'll invite him over and he can start the talk. Professor, please take it up.
This is going to be exciting to talk about this. As he mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit first about how I found Austrian economics, and then a little bit about the book, and then what Austrian economics is about, and then we'll go on to some Q&A. So the story really begins with me taking a wrong turn and going the wrong way. And what I mean by that is that I took the same route as most people do when they find Austrian economics. You might have heard that Austrian economics is political, which is something that critics often claim. It's not true, and I would claim that Austrian economics is the least political of all economics theories and all bodies of theory in economics. But the issue there is that most people find Austrian economics through libertarian politics or classical liberal politics and free market advocacy. And the same was true for me. So I was an activist, more or less. I organized events. I campaigned in my native Sweden against the welfare state and so forth for classical liberal and free market ideas. I even joined a party and was active in a party for about a decade. And I was even elected for office. So I really got into the whole politics thing before I realized that is a complete waste of time. From there, I got interested in the ideas themselves and in political philosophy, such things as what is society, what are rights, what is liberty for, things like that. So I got a degree in political science, and I pursued a master's, and I received a master's in political theory, which is political philosophy within political science. From there, I chose to change my career. I was a systems developer, and instead I headed for a career in academia, as I have right now. And it just so happens that I could not get into a PhD program in political philosophy in Sweden. It was very competitive, and I had the wrong ideas, and I was the wrong guy. So that's pretty much it. So I contacted the people at the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, sent them my resume, and said, well, is there anyone in your network who could take me on and advise me and have me in their PhD program? Because I want to head for academia, and for that you need a PhD. And the very next day I got an answer from Peter Klein, who was then at the University of Missouri, and he said, well, how about Missouri? And at first I thought, where is that? And then I chatted with Peter, and I applied, and I got accepted, and I moved to Missouri to pursue a PhD in agricultural economics, as was the department, which is really applied economics. It's hands-on. more than just mathematical theory as could be in the economics department. But I had the pleasure and the great advantage of studying with Peter Klein and a couple of other professors there as well, who were interested in organizations, interested in Austrian economics and transaction cost economics, in the new institutional economics. So sort of quirky, not middle of the road types of economics, even though the education itself was. And since Peter was then with the Mises Institute, I got a chance to get closer to the Mises Institute and study Austrian economics more formally with them, to go to seminars and attend Mises University and things like that. So in a sense, I got 2 degrees in one. So I studied mainstream economics and got a PhD that way. And I studied Austrian economics on the side, reading both Mises' Human Action and Rothbard's Man, Economy and State and so forth. And since then, I have been studying Austrian economics, and I haven't studied as much mainstream economics after the degree because it's not as interesting and it's not as important either, I think. Austrian economics has the better theories, the better founded theories, and the better explanations for real world phenomena. Whereas mainstream economics is it's detached from the real world for the simple reason that they have models based on assumptions that are simply not true. Like the perfect competition model, for instance, where you show how and when an economy is perfectly equilibrated and perfectly efficient. But the assumption is that everybody has perfect information about the present and the future, and then you can calculate sort of the maximizing allocation of resources. Of course, that has nothing to do with the real world. In the real world, everybody's somewhat ignorant. Everybody is suffering from uncertainty of the future. Everybody changes their mind all the time. So there's a lot going on, and those things are simply excluded from mainstream economics. Austrian economics, however, recognizes all of these things and really looks at how the real economy works and what are the mechanisms and the processes behind what we see. So when we see a price change, Austrian economics can tell us why and how that happens. Now, to the book project, we had to fast forward a few years when I was already a fellow with the Mises Institute, that had been to a few conferences and so forth. And this book project really was born out of a discussion with Jeff Deist, who was then the president of the Mises Institute. And I suggested to him that someone should write a introductory book on Austrian economics. And of course, there are such books already. The most famous one would be Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, but there are plenty of others too that introduce the reader to the Austrian school. But that's sort of the problem, that very often it is an introduction to the school, meaning the people and their ideas, rather than what is Austrian economics itself and what does it tell us about the world. And that's not really covered in many of these introductions. Some of them are pretty good, but they might be published by academic publishing houses, which means they're really, really expensive. You have Economics in One Lesson, as I mentioned. It really is one lesson. It doesn't cover the whole thing. So my idea was that someone ought to write an introductory book that covers the whole economy, the whole sort of corpus of Austrian economic theory, and does so in very short type of book that is very easy to read, that you can basically give to anyone and they will understand it. And that should be cheap and just easy to buy copies and hand out to people. And of course, who can write that sort of book? Well, no one really. But in my discussions with Jeff, we agreed that I should give it a shot and try it out, and the Mises Institute would publish it. And so I did. The idea was to write a newer version of the Economics in One Lesson that is half as long, so half as many words as Hazlitt's classic, but that is also covering the whole thing, the whole economy, how to do economics, what Austrian economics says, and how it's applied. And that's what I do. You can see on this slide that I have the table of contents with the 3 parts. And the first part is, what the heck is economics at all? What is economics study? Well, what is the economy? How do you do economics in a proper way? Is it just go out and measure stuff and run regressions, or is there something else? Because economics has been a science for 300 years. Obviously, we didn't run statistics programs on computers for 300 years. So there's plenty of economic reasoning, and I show why that is possible and why that is the proper way to go. And then, of course, the big part is part two, talking about the market. How does the market work? That it's not really a planned or designed arena, but it's an emergent phenomenon, and it's based on people acting simply. And it's about production. It's about the production side of the economy, trying to create things using scarce resources to satisfy people's wants, whatever they might be in the future. And then the third part, interventionism, is about the application of economic theory onto the real world, which of course is manipulated and distorted and tampered with by policymakers and the state on one hand, and also by collusion and cartels and so forth on the other hand. So there are plenty of different effects and impacts on the economy. So I spent a couple of chapters talking about that. The first one in this section is about the business cycle, which is for Austrian economics sort of a crown jewel. It's a probably the most known application of Austrian economics, showing why business cycles emerge, where they come from, and why it must be a cycle. Austrian economics is different here from other theories of economics, where Austrian economists talk about the business cycle as an actual true cycle. It starts with a boom that is unsustainable, that turns into a bust. Whereas other theories of economics, such as Keynesian economics and so forth, they would instead recognize in the real world that, oh, there's a bust or there's a recession. And then they would just go about saying, oh, why the heck did it happen and how can we fix it? But the real issue for an Austrian is that no, that it was preceded by a boom that was artificial, that was fictitious, that was caused by something. And that something, if that was removed, you wouldn't have the boom or the bust. You would just have a rather calm, but a progression forward towards more growth creation and the higher standard of living. So that's that's how the book turned out. And I think I managed to keep it at just about half as many words as Henry Hazlitt's classic. So it should be a really easy read. And when I wrote it, I really kept in mind throughout the whole process to write a book that someone's grandma can read and understand. So it doesn't have any jargon. It doesn't use fancy words. It doesn't use any math whatsoever. It should be really easy, even if English is not your first language, to just read it and comprehend it and get to at least a first level of economic understanding and economic literacy. And that in itself will take you much, much further than any formal education in economics. And you will understand a whole lot more than most, if not all, politicians. Okay, so what is Austrian economics and why is it important? Well, there are some core ideas, and I'm going to cover some of them here. Economic calculation is one such idea, which is super important and very core to Ludwig von Mises's work, where the problem in the economy is that you have a certain number of resources and you have certain different types of processes that can produce things, but you don't really know how many of anything to produce or how to produce them. So take such a resource as iron, for instance. It can be used for many different things, but how much of it should be used for thing A, and how much of it should be used for thing B, and how much of it should be used for thing C? Well, we don't know until after the fact. It's only when we have produced those things, A, B, and C, and we have tried to provide them to consumers and sold them to consumers, and consumers have bought them and have appreciated them, that's when we get sort of the key and the answer to the question, did we do the right thing? Did we do enough of it? Did we do sufficient quantities of it? Should we have done something else? What is the value of it? Have we produced the right thing? Now, how can we do this? Well, some might say that, well, we can use economic planning, and we can just have a committee of really smart people, and they can decide what should be produced and how much and when and so forth. And that's the sort of thing that has been tried in the Soviet Union and other socialist countries, and it doesn't work out at all. And the reason is that there is no means to calculate, because value is just satisfaction of people's wants. It's how better they feel from using a certain thing. It could be as easy as you're thirsty and you drink a glass of water, but it could be something that raises your status or reputation or your well-being in some other very subjective way. And you don't really know that until after the fact, and you can't really measure it either. So there is no way of measuring people's satisfaction. So they have to act on it themselves, and we have to decide how to use resources, what to produce before they act on buying or using the things that we produce. So that's a huge problem right there. And Austrian economics has the solution, whereas mainstream economics, sort of, they look the other way and they don't even recognize this as a problem because it doesn't enter into their simplified models. Now, the solution has to do with entrepreneurship, which is core to Austrian economics. And if you have taken any courses in mainstream economics, you would know that entrepreneurship is not really a part of it at all, because entrepreneurship has been thrown out. And the reason for that is that entrepreneurship is innovative, and it's creative, and it's disruptive. And you can't really fit that in a model. You can't fit that in a graph, and you can't fit that in an economic equation. So if you want to use graphs and economic or mathematical equations, then you can't really use entrepreneurship. And that's where mainstream economics is at today. For entrepreneurship, for Austrian economics, the market is a process. It's constantly evolving, constantly renewing itself, and it does so through entrepreneurship. The important part here to understand that the process as sort of expanding and progressing is that entrepreneurship creates these new things and discovers that they were actually valuable. So you can all think of entrepreneurs who created something new that changed our lives. So people might think of Steve Jobs and the smartphone. Of course, today, very few people don't have smartphones anymore, and we use smartphones for everything pretty much. Well, this world is very different from before the smartphone. And the same thing with the automobile. Before the automobile, well, people used horse and carriage. After the automobile, there was a very different type of world. And it's not only that we transport ourselves in a different way, but everything else that happened as well. We could transport things in a different way. We didn't need stables, but we needed gas stations. We needed mechanics and not stable boys. And everything really changed. And this is because entrepreneurs discovered a new and better way, and they betted on this new and better way. So you have Henry Ford, for instance. There's a famous quote that Henry Ford supposedly said that, had I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Because consumers don't really know what they want until they see it. But Henry Ford had the idea that, no, if I build an automobile that is affordable, a lot of people are going to buy it, and they're going to really like having it. And therefore, I will be able to replace the horse and carriage and the competitors for automobile manufacturing or whatever it might be. So he betted on what now is the fact that people liked automobiles as much better than horse and carriage. Now you can see then that these ideas, many of them suck. Many of these ideas, they don't change anything at all, but you need someone to bet on it. And entrepreneurship is that process of trying these things with the chance of earning great profits at the risk of losing everything that you invested. So that because you have both sides, and because entrepreneurs compete with each other, it is a process that's sort of balanced in its novel creation and doesn't leave people behind. Okay, so this really causes an economy as a process of emergence, where we can't really say where the economy is going. We can't really say what is going to be created. It's just going to end up being in a certain way because of these ideas that are competing. Of course, the entrepreneurs believe in their ideas, but whether they are successful or not depends on what consumers choose, and not some sort of preordained or forecast or predicted behavior. So the economy is not really designed. It emerges from the bottom up by people's actions, both producers and consumers, in sort of dancing together, if you will. Now, of course, the market is not a completely free market in any sense. So there's also a lot of impositions on the economy. And Mises referred to this as interventionism, where you have different types of policies and different types of restrictions and limitations added onto the economy in order to create certain types of outcomes that politicians want, which really means removing the power from consumers to decide what they want to buy and therefore what will remain and be profitable in the market, and instead make that a political issue and a political problem. And in the book, I talk about business cycles, as I mentioned before, which to Austrians is meddling with the money itself. And I talk also about the unrealized, that is, what would the economy have been like, and what could we have experienced were it not for regulations. Okay, so the book itself. The point of it is really to introduce people to sound economic thinking. So the idea is to spread the word and help people understand how the economy works and how to think about the economy, so that they, in a sense, liberating them and their minds. That's why the book is free to download. So if you go to the Mises website, mises.org/primer, you can download it for free. And I think currently the English and the Spanish editions are available for free, both PDF and audiobook and EPUB versions. There are currently 4 translations available and published: to Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, to Spanish in Mexico, to Korean in South Korea, and to Finnish in Finland. There are plenty of translations underway, and Mandarin Chinese is about to hit the presses pretty much. Turkish is getting close to being finalized as well. Polish, I know Dutch they've come pretty far. There's a Swedish translation that is yet to be published. There are plenty of other languages where it's coming as well. So hopefully this can give these ideas and make them available to a whole lot more people, and have people learn how the economy works, and this get sort of a basic fundamental grasp of the economy, which was the purpose of the book. Okay, so I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor. So the floor is open for questions and for any observation that you have had in the space of economics, and you find that a conflicting observation, you can maybe share and you can maybe have a conversation. So I was reading the book. I'm halfway past, so maybe I can put up a question, and then of course, like anyone else can also jump in. You don't have to seek my permission. You can just directly ask the professor. So one thing that I wanted to ask, Professor, you mentioned in the book that like economics favor free market operations in the same way as physics favor gravity free, not gravity free, but like uh, vacuum or air free environment. So in that sense, the question that I had was, most of the countries have evolved to follow Chicago School of Economics, Chicago School of Thought, or Keynesian sort of economics. Therein, do you think uh, that's partially because, like, in any country, in any geography, people will assume power and governments will try and control the means of production, and governments will try and sort of forecast as to what the aggregate demand and what the aggregate supply might look like. They will try to control the economy, and so even though Austrian economics should define how the economy should be operated if it were a free market economy, but most of the economies are not. Like, what's your critique? What's your comment on that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, economics has to start with how does the economy or the market work on its own, and then when we have figured that out, we can add regulations and see the effect of regulations on the outcome and on the structure and how well it works and so forth. So I mean, Austrian economics doesn't really take a stand on pro or against regulations or pro or against the state or anything like that. It's just a theory explaining how things work. Of course, from an Austrian perspective, if you understand how the economy works as a process, and it is a process, then you realize the true cost of regulations. And then it's very difficult to still think that regulations are worth it, because the cost to humankind, really, and to society is so enormous. The problem here, of course, is that since the economy is a process, you can't really say what will be, and you also cannot say what we did not get. So because, just like you mentioned, all economies are regulated to some extent. So there are licensing requirements, there are all kinds of safety requirements, there are taxes and what have you, all of these things. And all of them have specific effects. We can't really say, what if there had been no regulations? What would we have gotten? What types of new and fancy and really valuable products and services would be available? Well, we have no idea because those entrepreneurs never acted on it, right? So we don't know what we lost. We can theorize and reason our way to the conclusion that we lost probably quite a bit of wealth and prosperity, but what exactly? Well, we can't say because it's not here, right? So, and that's a problem because when someone promises a regulation, it sounds like they're promising an outcome and they're promising a solution to a problem. Of course, they too can't know the outcome. They just pretend that they know, or sometimes they lie because they want the regulation in place. And they lie about what the world will be like. And there's a reason why we have, through politics, regulated economies for hundreds of years, and still there is, to politicians, a need to regulate more. Now, why is that? Why is it that we've regulated so much for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they haven't solved the problems yet? Well, the reason is simply that you can't solve problems that way. It's very, very, very difficult to solve problems that way. But it's easy to promise those solutions. And then when you don't actually get the solution, you can say, well, it was because of this, or it was because of that, or we just need a little more, or we didn't do quite enough. So I think Paul Krugman mentioned when we had the great financial crisis some 15 plus years ago, he mentioned, he said that, well, we need a stimulus package. We need the state to step in and spend a whole lot of money to solve this problem. And he said, if that doesn't solve the problem, it's because we spent too little. You can always claim this for regulations that, oh, we did the right thing, but we should have done even more, but someone stopped me or what have you. So this makes it really difficult to argue against this because these are promises, and these are promises made by people who have a career at stake for making these promises. The only one standing in their way is really the sound economist, basically the Austrian economist, saying that wait a minute, you haven't considered nearly how many of the problems that might be caused because of this regulation. What are the true costs of imposing this restriction on the economy? And I mean, no one wants to hear that. They want to hear what is the solution. So that is the problem. Many schools of economic thought today, they function in that space where they don't contrast how the economy itself works with how the regulated economy sort of malfunctions, or how it works differently because the economic processes, which are still the same, they are restricted by the regulations. So you mentioned Chicago School, and Chicago School is by far the biggest school of economic thought within libertarianism, for instance. So while most Austrians are libertarians, most libertarians are not Austrians. They're Chicago School. But Chicago School struggles with the problem that they're using mathematical models and they're using very simplified diagrams and so forth. They don't see the economy as a process, and they don't have a theory of the entrepreneur and so forth. So they're pretty far from explaining the real economy, the way it actually works. And Keynesian's the same. I mean, Keynesian economics was really a political project to begin with. It didn't really attempt to understand the economy, but wanted to facilitate politics by in a sense unleashing or freeing policy from the limitations of an economic understanding. So it is the most influential economic theory today, and it has spawned such things as MMT and other pseudo theories. But it's not really an economic theory. It's based on rejecting sound economics. So I'm not sure that was a very long way of trying to answer your question, but not sure I addressed it properly.
No, it is sort of answered. I would let other people ask my question and then maybe do a follow up on this one.
Sure.
Professor Per, I think you have upped your Twitter shitposting past days. I'm really loving it. Also, I just wanted to mention this one classical tweet of yours, all-time classic tweet of yours to guys here. The tweet says, "What causes poverty? Nothing. It's the original state, the default, and the starting point. The real question is, what causes prosperity?" Uh, Also, Professor Per, have you come across this? You might have Robert Murphy's chaos theory.
Yes, I have. It's a very long time since I read it, but yes, absolutely.
Wanted to know your thoughts on free market insurance, on a free market, how an insurance company would operate.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think there is any doubt, at least not to my mind, that an economy could work and function really well and prosper. A society could prosper without the state. So, I mean, there, Bob and I definitely agree. Exactly what it would look like. I mean, that's the problem with economic understanding, right? It would be created by entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs would compete with each other in order to serve consumers. And what would entrepreneurs come up with, and what will consumers choose? I have no clue. There's no way of knowing this, right? So maybe God would know, but I certainly don't, and there's no way of saying. What we can do is draft different theories of how things might work. Like you mentioned, insurance companies. I think Rothbard has protection agencies in several of his works, where you sort of insure yourself and your rights, um, for for well, I mean, there are different. What you can do, I think, an interesting way of putting this is the way that Dick Furley does, even though he's writing under the pseudonym Matt Stone. So if you go to the website that I founded and ran for a long time, I still have it, but I haven't done anything about it for a long time. If you go to anarchism.net /steps, STEPPES.htm, I posted his book there on the steppes of Central Asia. I think that's an interesting book. It's a short novel, so it's fiction, but it describes a society that is stateless, and it's different from how Bob Murphy and Murray Rothbard describes such a free society. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. So read that and let me know what you think. It's really interesting. Let me put it in the chat so that you have it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Did you say STEPP?
STEPPES.
The step A.
I put it in the chat.
Thanks, Professor.
Yeah, so I can go next maybe. So I have a question. You might have heard this argument before, but like Austrian economics and praxeology assumes that human beings act rational, but many times they are irrational due to different reasons like religion or whatever, and hence Austrian economics would fail in those scenarios. Like, how do we? What is the counter argument to that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you're right. It's a common attempt at a criticism. And if you read Mises' Human Action, it states in there that human action is always and everywhere perfectly rational. The issue, though, is that Austrians do not use the word rational in the sense that most people do. So most people would say, well, rational means that you have to have perfect information, because otherwise you might, if you don't know about something, you might act irrationally, because they're looking at the outcome itself. So in that sense, only God can be rational, and no one else can be. We can get close to it maybe in some situations, but that's about it. But other than that, we are irrational, and we see other people acting all the time, and we think they're crazy and they're stupid, and God knows what they're doing. But Austrian economics have a formal definition of it, namely that action is purposeful behavior, and it's taken in order to attain an end that the user values and thinks is possible. And what that means then is that in any situation, you as the actor will always choose what you think is most valuable in that situation. There can be no other way because value is in your own terms anyway. So whatever you choose, that has to have been what you valued most. There might be other options that you simply didn't recognize, that you didn't observe, that you didn't see. Well, those are not part of your calculus. And it might be the case that you're completely ignorant and that you're a dumbass, basically. And therefore, you will not be able to even reach that goal that you set out to attain. And then, then maybe you're stupid or maybe you're misinformed or whatever it might be. But the action itself, when taken, was rational because it was guided by your own valuation. So in that sense, action is always rational. It's not rational in the sense that could you possibly have done something else that turned out to be more valuable to you? Yeah, sure. With other means, with other understandings, with perfect hindsight, yeah, you could have done something different. That's not the issue in Austrian economics. Or Austrian economics is about the action itself, and that decision is rational because you can't really choose anything that is of lesser value than an option that you have, because by choosing, you are already revealing that you value that option higher than the others for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect explanation. Thanks.
Professor Per, I had a adjacent question. So you mentioned, and I've read the first part of the book mentions that the value is reflected through the action because there's no way for someone to go inside someone's head and figure out like what is valuable to them. And so we will start from the action and how people actually act to make a picture of what's of value to them and what is it that they're going to take, what is it that they're going to do in the economy. So that's all that comes under Austrian economics. Is there any branch of economics or social science which covers how can people take an aligned action which is in alignment with their values, and if it is misaligned, how can they correct it? Like, what part of social science will that be?
Well, I think in a sense, Austrian economics excludes that because value is subjective, right? So it's on your own terms, and therefore your own action will necessarily be aligned with your own valuation. It's not aligned with actually achieving the type of value that you predicted or expected. Because very often we do things and we expect it to be great, and then it turns out that, nah, it wasn't good. So in a sense, that can be studied, that we maybe choose the wrong things given what we ourselves value, but that is how and why we value things. And that's the realm of psychology. Economics is about what are the outcomes socially for society, the structure of society and the economy, because people act aligned with whatever they value, given their limitations in knowledge, their limitations in understanding, their limitations in access to means, and what have you. So psychology would study what do we value and why, and economics starts with the fact that we value things and act to attain greater value. That explains the outcomes of society, in a sense, the structure of society and our general prosperity.
Thanks so much, Professor. I was also thinking that it should be religion or philosophy, but I think psychology is closer to it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
I think you're right there.
There's something to say about that too, but it's about how people choose their values, right? And religion is a part of that too.
All right, thanks.
Hey, Professor, I had a question from Paper Psych on chat. I'll read it out. My audio is fine, right? Just to confirm. So the
Yeah,
question
of
is,
course.
given the book's emphasis on human action and subjective evaluation, what further research would you suggest to understand the impact of psychological factors on economic decisions? Any specific studies into behavioral economics, etc.?
That's a very good question. I think it would be wise to stay away from behavioral economics to begin with, because behavioral economics is really sort of a pop psychology applied on a poor understanding of economics. So that's a way of tricking yourself and sort of misunderstanding things. I'm not sure if there is a good study like that. I mean, there are plenty of sort of self-help guides that you can look at in order to make better decisions, better predictions, to reason through your options in a clearer way and make decisions. Maybe decision-making science or something like that. But that's really outside of the scope of my expertise. Anybody else?
I had a question. I mean, what advice do you have for somebody who wants to, for instance, excel in acquiring knowledge of Austrian economics? Because most conventional universities, courses, and colleges teach what you refer to as mainstream economics. So, if somebody is really interested in this subject and they want to excel in acquiring knowledge of this subject, the majority conventional universities and colleges are ruled out. So, what resources do these people have available apart from the books available in the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a question I get a lot too, because there really is a demand for digging deeper into Austrian economics and not just reading the books on your own or being part of a book club like this and read books on Austrian economics and discuss them. But how can you not only get an education but get the training and the guidance to learn more? There are some universities and some programs that you can consult. The Mises Institute started a graduate school where they offered a master's degree. Unfortunately, they've stopped doing that, but I think Grove City College will start offering a master's degree online. That is a regular master's degree, but it's going to be completely Austrian economics. So Grove City College is one such resource. If you speak Spanish, then you have an Austrian program at Rey Juan Carlos University here in Madrid, which is where I'm doing my sabbatical now. That's why I'm here, where you have Jesus Huerta de Soto and Philip Bagus and others. So there's an Austrian program here. You of course have the PhD program in economics at George Mason University. It's not really a full-scale Austrian program. It's more like you can study with Austrians and you can take a field in Austrian economics, which basically means it's one of your specializations. But other than that, it's as far as I understand, it's mainstream. Other than that, there is not a whole lot. Well, you have University of Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala, of course, but there too, speaking Spanish is probably not a bad idea. Other than that, I would suggest that you go to a university where there is a faculty member, or preferably more than one, who is an Austrian economist and doesn't mind teaching Austrian economics. So contact them, ask them. I mean, if you're going for an advanced degree, it's easier, and then you probably need to study much of the mainstream program anyway. But you can at least get a good schooling in Austrian economics as part of the program. So, for instance, if you would consider a PhD in entrepreneurship from Oklahoma State, where I'm at, one of the seminars that you have to take is taught by me, and it's highly influenced by Austrian economics. So it's more or less an Austrian course, and you can, of course, do your research and so forth under me, so you can use Austrian ideas there. It's not an Austrian program, so you still would need to do mainstream things. It is very difficult to get a mainstream education and a degree, or get a degree without studying mainstream and doing it only in Austrian economics. You basically have those alternatives that I just mentioned.
Thanks a lot.
I would also say that, I mean, going to different institutes have courses. They don't offer degrees or anything like that, but they have courses and they have workshops and they have seminars and they have networks that will help you understand and get acquainted with different types of Austrian ideas too. Of course, the Mises Institute in the US, they have the Mises University every year in July, which is for mostly undergraduate students, where it's a 1 week focused study on Austrian economics. They also have the Rothbard Graduate Seminar, which is for graduate students, where you dig deep into a treatise in Austrian economics, so either human action or man economy and state or something like that. For one full week, you and another around 20 graduate students go through the whole thing in seminars and discussions and so forth. And you have similar things in many countries with different names. They're either free market or they're sort of classical liberal or libertarian think tanks and things like that, but they very often have Austrian educations.
Thanks.
Professor, there's a couple of questions. So, about your favorite economic theories.
Shreyan, there's a lot of disturbance from your side, so maybe I'll just repeat your question. So folks were curious, Professor, as to what are your favorite Austrian economics and favorite books in that space. So if you can just share that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, the favorite books or favorite Austrian thinkers, or both?
Both. The questions are in chat on both.
Okay. Well, in terms of Austrian theorists, it sort of depends on what day you ask me. But I think overall, I mean, I would either go with Menger or with Mises, one of the two. And the reason I said it depends on what day, it's simply because some days I'm just in awe of what Menger contributed through his original treatise and the different perspective that he had and the theory of value and the good and everything else that he outlined in his principles just created a completely new way of thinking about economics, which is fantastic. Other days I recognize that, but then I think, well, economic calculation, the way Mises understands it and the way he described it and the way he used it to explain how the market economy works and how socialist economy does not work, and as well as the business cycle theory and all these other contributions of Mises, he was so much broader and made so many more contributions, of course, building off of Menger. So one of the two, Menger or Mises, they're definitely my favorite economists in the Austrian school. In terms of books, I mean, in a sense, it's their treatises. I would read, and well, I did read the economics treatises in Austrian economics from start to finish, in a sense. So I read them in order. So I read Menger's Principles, his book on methods, then von Bauwerk's Capital of Interest, and moving on from there. In terms of economic theory, I mean, reading Menger's Principles followed by Mises' Human Action is mind-blowing. You might want to read Rothbard's Man, Economy, and State. When I teach a course on Austrian economics at Oklahoma State University for undergraduates, and I use a lot of different readings in that course, which are from all the sort of masters in Austrian economics. But the students really prefer Rothbard's Man, Economy, and State because it's so much easier to read and so much easier to understand. This said, it's pretty easy to understand Menger and Mises as well. It's just that Rothbard has more of an American way of writing. So he uses shorter sentences and is much more direct, whereas Europeans tend to be a little more long-winded and indirect in their discussions.
Thanks, Professor Per. Strat, you had a
Of course.
question?
Yeah, I was trying to type it. Yeah, like it's just a confusion regarding something in the presentation. Like you mentioned Keynesian economics recognizing the bust recession and like focusing on how we can fix the issue. And so does Austrian economics not focus on fixing the issue at all? Or is it just about finding the causes?
Oh, thank you. That's a very good question. So, yes, Austrian economics says that there is a cause of the whole boom and bust cycle, and without that cause, it wouldn't happen. Of course, there are ways that you can dampen the fall and you can make things better in order for the economy to correct itself. But because Austrian economics sees the business cycle as a response to a distortion, the boom that happens is artificial and has no real basis. So the boom will have to bust. So the bust in that sense is sort of a correction, and it's a going back to where the economy should be. And that correction should be made as easy as possible, and that can of course be done through different kinds of policies and deregulations and what have you. To Keynesians, there's nothing wrong with an artificial boom. They don't really care about creating bubbles. They just care about stepping in and doing something when the bubble bursts. And typically the solution per Keynes himself is to create another bubble on top of it, the previous one that is even bigger, so it can sort of swallow the previous bubble. To an Austrian, that's really terrible way of doing it, because you're just expanding the problem. You're not only kicking the can down the road, so to speak, but you're creating a bigger bubble, which is going to cause even more harm. To Keynesian, there's really no such thing as a sound economy in a sense, because the bubble, when it bursts, that's the problem. It's not the bubble itself. So I was a little bit unclear there that Keynesians look at the solution to it only. What they're saying is really that the bust itself came out of nowhere, and the Keynes even referred to it as animal spirits. That was the explanation. But their assumption is that the economy can't handle itself. It's always going to go either too hot or too cold. So it's either going to be growing too fast or it's going to shrink, and therefore someone needs to step in and fix it for the economy, because everybody in the economy is an idiot. Whereas Austrian economics have a theory of how the economy works and why it works in a certain way, and then meddling with it will cause this additional bubble or boom on top of it that is not sustainable. It can't last, and therefore it's followed by a bust.
That makes so much more sense now.
Oh God.
Stratosphere, hashtag Bitcoin fixes this.
There's a question in the chat which I resonate with as well. The question is by Anthony, and he wants to know what is Professor Bylund's opinion on Bitcoin. Can you please answer this question?
Sure. I sort of expected that to be asked sooner or later. It sort of depends on what exactly you mean by opinion, because one common question is Bitcoin money, and that question has a clear answer from an Austrian economic theory perspective, and that answer is no, because in order to be a money, you need to be the most, or the commonly used, or the universally used medium of exchange, which means basically that most people will accept it as payment for services, and prices will be posted in it and so forth. So that is not the case outside of very special situations. So is Bitcoin money? That answer is no. Can it become money? Yeah, of course it can. I think Bitcoin is I mean, the technology itself is awesome, and I think it can be applied in many different ways and in many different situations very productively. Bitcoin as a currency, it is interesting as an asset. I think. Do I own Bitcoin? Yeah, I do. Not a lot, but I have invested in it. Do I expect it to become money? I do not. I think that a lot of very powerful forces are trying to stop that, and they're trying to create all kinds of other BS, like a central bank digital currencies and things like that, to sort of get around the problem with cryptocurrencies, plural, in general. I think it's a very interesting experiment, however, and I think it's promising as well. And I hope that more people will adopt it as money, or whatever other cryptocurrency. I mean, as an Austrian economist, I'm not really interested in what exactly people use for money. What I am interested in, what are the impacts on the economy? And of course, with a fiat currency like we have today, with all the states' different currencies that are not backed by anything, and they're printed or created at will, that has a lot of very severe distortive effects on the economy, and that keeps us poor and makes us poor. Whereas Bitcoin would not be able to do this. It would be much closer to a commodity money as we had before with the gold standard and the bimetallism with gold and silver and whatever else we've used throughout history. So in that sense, it's a much, much better alternative than the state currencies.
Thanks for answering.
Professor, can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Of course.
Yeah. Like let's say money goes through this transition, right? First, it has to be a store of value, then medium of exchange, then unit of account, right? Like let's say hypothetically, like we don't know what happens in 20, 30 years. Let's say Bitcoin adoption increases a lot, and due to that, volatility might go down. Like going forward, let's say 20 years, if that daily volatility is less than like 1% or like 0.5%, then it can be used as a medium of exchange, right? Because both the parties will be happy. It won't happen like that. Like whenever a merchant receives Bitcoin and next day it is going to 20% down, it won't happen. Like if less volatility is there, and he will be easily accept that. And once medium of exchange happens due to the less volatility, then it makes sense that for that merchant to denominate everything whatever he's selling in Bitcoin, right? That could happen like going forward.
Yeah, like I said, Bitcoin can become money. Absolutely. I'm not sure it has to do with volatility and so forth, because I mean, whatever is used universally will have less volatility, especially if it's backed by something. I mean, Bitcoin is not backed by anything, but it's also not created the way that dollars or pounds or euros or whatever are created. So there is a rather fixed supply, which means it's much easier for people to relate to it and understand it in that sense. So, I mean, all it takes is adoption, and when it's sufficiently adopted, it's going to be money by that definition. And I don't see a problem for Bitcoin to get there. I think that the real issue is not really volatility or anything like that, or even, as you recognize, that a process for how something becomes money. It doesn't have to follow that process. I've stated before that the Bitcoin problem is really innovation, and I mean that in the formal sense that invention and innovation are different things. Invention is the new thing, the technology, and so forth, whereas innovation is taking something to market and making it valuable to people. And that's where Bitcoin is lacking. And I'm not saying there has not been any innovation. There's been enormous innovation, but there hasn't been enough for it to become money. So it still needs to become easier and more reliable and more accessible and whatever it might be that's keeping people from using it. So if people find it much easier and therefore they would reach for it much more often, maybe it's just a matter of more sellers accepting it as payment, whatever it might be. But that sort of innovation must happen for it to become money. And I think it can happen. It's certainly moving in that direction, but it hasn't happened yet. So in that sense, there's a lack. It's not uninnovative in any sense, but there's more required for it to become money.
Thanks, Professor. Thanks.
Professor, there are a couple of questions that are posted in the chat. I'll just read out. The first question, the questions are by paper side. The first question is, what cliche about economics do you think is bullshit? And what cliche holds the truth? That's the first question.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. There's so many different views of economics that are just wrong. I mean, one of the reasons that I thought this book was necessary was that people really don't understand what economics is. And I have these discussions on Twitter or X with MMTers pretty much every day, that they say that economics has failed or whatever it might be, and they really have no clue what it is. They think it's a matter of predicting specific outcomes in the economy. It's not. It's about understanding how the economy works. A common comment when I talk to just regular people and say that I'm an economist, they ask me what stocks to purchase on the stock exchange. I have no clue about that. That has nothing to do with economics. Economics is about understanding what the heck is going on around us in the economy. I think another thing that people tend to claim and think is really wise and really really smart, I guess, is post-scarcity, that we now live in such abundance that we don't really need economics, or we don't really need to economize anymore because we have so much, which is a complete misunderstanding of what scarcity means in economics. So there's so many things that are just plain wrong. I think one of the most dangerous ones is the whole cost creates value misunderstanding, which is a misunderstanding that economists themselves had for some 150 years. And they think that just because something costs more to produce, it's more valuable, which is not true at all. It is produced because, and the producer takes on extra cost because they expect the product to be more valuable. So it's really the value that determines the cost of production. So it's not the case that an iPhone, for instance, has a very high price because they put all these fancy materials and processors and memory, whatever, in it. That's not what creates the higher price. They chose to put those things in there, and they could afford to put all those materials and all this design and everything in there because they expect to sell it at a higher price. So it's the expected value that justifies and makes affordable the costs of production. Because any entrepreneur, if they think that, well, I can produce something like the iPhone and I can only charge $100 for it, well, they would never start the business because the cost is too high. And if they could sell, I don't know, a glass of water for $1 million, then they wouldn't go looking for other things to add to the water. They would just sell the glass of water for $1 million. It's not the case that the glass of water is worth $1 million just because they put a lot of effort into producing the water. It's the other way around. You put a lot of effort into something because you expect the outcome to be much more valuable. So that's the most dangerous thing, for sure. I think something that is true is that economists are terrible at predicting the future, and that's simply because that's not what economics is for, even though mainstream economics pretends to. What else? That economics is a lot of math, and yes, mainstream economics is. But I mean, most perceptions and views of economics are plain fiction.
Professor, thanks
Right,
so
thanks.
much. I had a adjacent question to that. When you mentioned that value is not a function of cost, value is completely subjective. So right now, like, a lot of people think that Bitcoin's value comes from the fact that miners spend so much of money to mine the new Bitcoin block, which is definitely not an idea or a thing that Austrian economics subscribe to. So a lot of people are valuing Bitcoin because they feel that Bitcoin is a hedge against all the turmoil and all the sort of problems that might come to the traditional finance or economic space. But you, as an Austrian economist, and you as someone who follows the space, what do you think as to what can builders like us do to increase the value of Bitcoin? Like, what kind of things should we be building? And you have a great understanding of the tech space as well, right? So what is happening right now in the tech space? So what as a builder should we do to sort of have to steer Bitcoin value to get to an even better place, higher number?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that bothers me a lot when Bitcoiners tell me that Bitcoin is worth a lot because it takes a whole lot of electronic power to mine Bitcoins. And that's not why it has value. People mine and they put all this cost into mining because they expect it to be valuable. What you can do to make it valuable is simply make it more useful to people. So more people who demand it, they will place a higher value in it if it's much more useful. So not only as an investment asset as it is mainly today, but if you make it much more useful, so you create, say, trading places and marketplaces, and you offer more goods and services, you make it easier to use, safer to use, or just change how you use it, or in a way that people understand it better. So that maybe your grandma can use Bitcoin and understands what she's doing. That would make Bitcoin more valuable. And also, as someone mentioned before, it would make Bitcoin more stable as an asset.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. We are near to 9:15, so maybe just one or two more questions and then we'll wrap up. It's already 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Anthony?
I just had a follow-up question, Professor.
Yeah.
You mentioned that Bitcoin is not where it is. Bitcoin is not so considered to be so precious by Bitcoiners because it consumes a lot of computational power. What do you think is the reason, as per you, why people who are buying Bitcoin believe that it is worth 44,000 US dollars?
Well, I mean, that is, now we're in psychology. So now we're talking about why they value certain things, and I don't know. I can only speculate. I think a lot of people probably invest in it because, as was previously mentioned, as a hedge from inflation might be one. Maybe they think that the value will go up in the future, and therefore they want to be part of that process. There might be many different reasons. Some might simply think that, hey, it's worth a lot because they get friends in the Bitcoin community. I mean, it's very subjective.
Great answer.
Right, true. All right. So there's one question by paper side. I'll just read out that question. Do you have any conspiracy theories? If yes, what are they?
Yeah, plenty. But the problem now recently is that a lot of conspiracy theories turned out to be true. So I'm not sure they're conspiracies anymore, or at least they're not conspiracy theories. I mean, the central banking digital currencies, for instance,
True.
it's perhaps a conspiracy, but it's out in the open. The central banks are talking about it, and they're talking about how it's supposed to control people's lives and make people buy and sell what the central bankers want them to buy and sell. So it's not really a conspiracy theory because it's true and it's out there.
Awesome. So on that note, I guess thank you so much, Professor, for taking your time out and sharing your journey and taking us through the intro session of how to think about the economy. So from next week onward, all of us, or as many of us as can join, and other folks will join in here at 8 p.m. We look forward to all of you, and we begin the chapter 1 of the book. Thanks so much again. If there's anything else that's left unsaid, Shreyan, please add. And is it okay with everyone if we record and put it on YouTube? If it is not, then we will maybe not do that.
Fine with me. So thank you all for listening, and thanks for the questions.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.